Peace, love, and life, family. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers, tuning in with you all on this beautiful, lovely Saturday morning. I am having a yard sale right now. It's kind of early, so I'm under my shade bush, relaxing, eating watermelon, and drinking my water. Guys, stay hydrated. Out my mason jar. So I shouldn't be drinking out that plastic straw. That's the whole purpose of me drinking out the mason jar. Anyways, I have been reading Black Boy by Richard Wright, and now we are up to chapter 6. I download these lives and then upload them to my YouTube channel, which is Moremy, Moremy. So find me on there. It'll be a red logo with my M in it. And I post different content on there. Me reading. I have a playlist called Storytime with Moremy. I have poems, because I am a poet, up there. I have some interviews that I've done with local business owners or artists, and I'll be adding more soon. I'm getting into my creative juices, and I got skit ideas pertaining to the topics of sex, love, and relationships, and that kind of back some of the posts that you all see me post. So shout out to everybody that contributes and gives their opinion. And even if you don't, those of you that discuss it amongst your friends or just think internally to yourself about things that I ask, it's all beneficial and it's all for research, and it's a part of my mission as the creator of more of my edutainment group, to entertain but also educate, as we just are on this journey of life together. So hopping back into chapter 6, I believe in the last chapter, his grandfather had just passed, and so life is about to shift for young Richard. Black Boy by Richard Wright, chapter 6. The next day at school, I inquired among the students about jobs and was given the name of a white family who wanted a boy to do chores. That afternoon, as soon as school had let out, I went to the address. A tall, dour white woman talked to me. Yes, she needed a boy, an honest boy, $2 a week, mornings, evenings, and all Saturdays. Washing dishes, chopping wood, scrubbing floors, cleaning the yard, I would get my breakfast and dinner. As I asked the timid questions, my eyes darted about. What kind of food would I get? Was the place as shabby as the kitchen indicated? Do you want this job? The woman asked. Yes, ma'am, I said, afraid to trust my own judgment. Now, boy, I want to ask you one question, and I want you to tell me the truth, she said. Yes, ma'am, I said, all attention. Do you steal? She asked me seriously. I burst into a laugh, then checked myself. What's so damn funny about that? She asked. Lady, if I was a thief, I'd never tell anybody. What do you mean? She blazed with a red face. I had made a mistake during my first 5 minutes in the white world. I hung my head. No, ma'am, I mumbled. I don't steal. She stared at me, trying to make up her mind. Now, look, we don't want a sassy nigger around here, she said. No, ma'am, I assured her. I'm not sassy. Promising to report the next morning at 6 o'clock, I walked home and pondered on what could possibly have been in the woman's mind to have made her ask me point blank if I stole. Then I recalled hearing that white people looked upon Negroes as a variety of children, and it was only in the light of that her question made any sense. If I had been planning to murder her, I certainly would not have told her, and rationally she no doubt realized it. Yet habit had overcome her rationality and had made her ask me, Boy, do you steal? Only an idiot would have answered, Yes, ma'am, I steal. What would happen now that I would be among white people for hours at a stretch? Would they hit me? Curse me? If they did, I would leave at once. In all my wishing for a job, I had not thought of how I would be treated, and now it loomed important, decisive, sweeping down beneath every consideration. I will be polite, humble, say yes sir and no sir, yes ma'am and no ma'am, hearing yes sir and no sir and yes ma'am and no ma'am, but I would draw a line over which they must not step. Oh, maybe I'm just thinking up trouble, I told myself. They might like me. So this is reminding me of, I've just started watching When They See Us on Netflix. And I can see how that angers folks and why some people probably shouldn't watch it. But just to see how, like, this is back in the probably the 30s, 40s, I'm not sure, when this is taking place. And we know about slavery, that time period, segregation time period, and even up to today. Instead of, lynchings, which that still happens too, but instead of just like being sold on a slave block or lynchings and stuff, like now you just have cops that do the deed. And so he's talking about like his journey in the white world, trying to work and never considering how he would be treated. But to to be a young man and you hit a certain age where like income and holding your own is important, and then realizing that that's threatened every day of your life, and things that you say or do can really impact your life or death, or the respect you would get or not, and a superior force that is paying you to help you provide for yourself. I could just imagine what kind of pressure that puts on a black man and a black boy trying to come into, you know, his manhood as well as his identity with having black skin. So, oh, maybe I'm just thinking up trouble. I told myself they might like me. The next morning, I chopped wood for the cook stove, lugged in scuttles of coal for the grates, washed the front porch and swept the back porch, swept the kitchen, helped wait on the table, and washed the dishes. I was sweating. I swept the front walk and ran to the store to shop. When I returned, the woman said, "Your breakfast is in the kitchen." "Thank you, ma'am." I saw a plate of thick black molasses and a hunk of white bread on the table. Would I get no more than this? They had had eggs, bacon, coffee. I picked up the bread and tried to break it. It was stale and hard. Well, I would drink the molasses. I lifted the plate and brought it to my lips and saw floating on the surface of the black liquid green and white bits of mold. "God damn, I can't eat this," I told myself. The food was not even clean. The woman came into the kitchen as I was putting on my coat. "You didn't eat," she said. "No, ma'am," I said. "I'm not hungry." "You eat well at home? You eat at home?" she asked hopefully. "Well, I just wasn't hungry this morning, ma'am," I lied. "You don't like molasses and bread?" she said dramatically. "Oh, yes, ma'am, I do," I defended myself quickly, not wanting her to think that I dared criticize what she had given me. "I don't know what's happening to you niggas nowadays," she sighed, wagging her head. She looked closely at the molasses. "It's a sin to throw out molasses like that. I'll put it up for you this evening." "Yes, ma'am," I said heartily. Neatly, she covered the plate of molasses with another plate, then filled the bread and dumped it into the garbage. She turned to me, her face lit with an idea. "What grade are you in school?" "Seventh, ma'am." "Then why are you going to school?" she asked in surprise. "Well, I want to be a writer," I mumbled, unsure of myself. I had not planned to tell her that, but she had made me feel so utterly wrong and of no account that I needed to bolster myself. "A what?" she demanded. "A writer," I mumbled. "For what?" "To write stories," I mumbled defensively. "You'll never be a writer," she said. "Who on earth put such ideas into your nigger head?" "Nobody," I said. "I didn't think anybody ever would," she declared indignantly. As I walked around the house to the street, I knew that I would not go back. The woman had assaulted my ego. She had assumed that she knew my place in life, what I felt, what I ought to be, and I resented it with all my heart. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I would never be a writer, but I did not want her to say so. As I'm reading his book, he became a writer. This reminds me of like not letting people like that whole people will say things about you and it actually motivates you, it actually encourages you. And how we put up with BS on jobs just because they pay us. I'm sure much worse has been said to people on their jobs, or they've given their all and like not got much in return. And he was like, first day I already knew I wasn't going back. We have to have that type of self-respect. And if we had as much faith as we claim to have, or force ourselves to believe, we should tap into it and use it, okay? Because if that job can't respect you and you feel like shit going in there every day and you stressed and it ain't really barely paying your bills no way, you sometimes just gotta take a leap of faith, okay? I love watermelon, y'all. Sorry for eating on camera. So I'm gonna read that last paragraph again. As I walked around her house to the street, I knew that I would not go back. The woman had assaulted my ego. She had assumed that she knew my place in life, what I felt, what I ought to be, and I resented it with all my heart. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I would never be a writer, but I did not want her to say so. Grand Rising, Selena. Had I kept the job, I would have learned quickly just how white people acted toward Negroes, but I was too naive to think that there were many white people like that. I told myself that there were good white people, people with money and sensitive feelings. As a whole, I felt that they were bad, but I would be lucky enough to find the exceptions. Fearing that my family might think I was finicky, I lied to them, telling them that the white woman had already hired a boy. At school, I continued to ask about jobs and was directed to another address. As soon as school was out, I made for the house. Yes, the woman said that she wanted a boy who could milk a cow, feed chickens, gather vegetables, help serve breakfast and dinner. But I can't milk a cow, ma'am, I said. Where are you from? She asked incredulously. Here in Jackson, I said. You mean to stand there, nigga, and tell me that you live in Jackson and don't know how to milk a cow? She demanded in surprise. I said nothing, but I was quickly learning the reality, a Negro's reality of the white world. One woman had assumed that I would tell her if I stole, and now this woman was amazed that I could not milk a cow. I, a nigger who dared live in Jackson. They were all turning out to be alike, differing only in detail. I faced a wall in the woman's mind, a wall that she did not know was there. I just never learned, I said, finally. I'll show you how to milk, she said, as though glad to be charitable enough to repair a nigger's knowledge of that score. It's easy. The place was large. They had a cow, chickens, a garden, all which spelled food, and that decided me. I told her that I would take the job, and I reported for work the next morning. My tasks were simple, but many. I milked the cow under her supervision, gathered eggs, swept, and was through in time to serve breakfast. The dining room table was set for 5. There were eggs, bacon, toast, jam, butter, milk, apples. That seemed promising. The woman told me to bring the food in as they called for it, and I familiarized myself in the kitchen so that I could act quickly when called upon. Finally, the woman came into the dining room, followed by a pale young man who sat down and stared at the food. What the hell? He snarled. Every morning it's these damn eggs for breakfast. Listen, you son of a bitch, the woman said, sitting too. You don't have to eat them. You might try serving me dirt, he said, and forked up the bacon. I felt that I was dreaming. Were they like that all the time? If so, I would not stay here. A young girl came and flopped into her chair. That's right, you bitch, the young man said. Knock the food right out of my goddamn mouth. You know what you can do, the girl said. I stared at them so intently that I was not aware that the young man was watching me. Say, what in the hell you glaring at me for, you nigger bastard? He demanded. Get those goddamn biscuits off that stove and put them on the table. Yes, sir. 2 middle-aged men came in and sat down. I never learned who was in the family, who was related to whom, or if it was a family. They cursed each other in an amazingly offhand manner, and nobody seemed to mind. As they hurled incentives, they barely looked at each other. I was tense each moment, trying to anticipate their wishes and avoid a curse, and I did not suspect that the tension I had begun to feel that morning would lift itself into the passion of my life. Perhaps I had waited too long to start working for white people. Perhaps I should have begun earlier, when I was younger, as most of the other black boys had done, and perhaps by now the tension would have become an habitual condition, contained and controlled by reflex. But that was not to be my lot. I was always to be conscious of it, brood over it. I was always to be conscious of it, brood over it, carry it in my heart, live with it, sleep with it, fight with it. The morning was physically tiring, but the nervous strain, the fear that my actions would call down upon my head a storm of curses was even more damaging. When the time came for me to go to school, I was emotionally spent, but I clung to the job because I got enough to eat and no one watched me closely and measured out my food. I had rarely tasted eggs, and I would put hunks of yellow butter into a hot skillet and hurriedly scramble 3 or 4 eggs at a time and gobble them down in huge mouthfuls so that the woman would not see me. And I would take tumblers of milk behind a convenient door and drain them in a swallow as though they contained water. Though the food I ate strengthened my body, I acquired another problem. I had fallen down in my studies at school. Had I been physically stronger and not my new tension sapped by already limited energy, I might have been able to work mornings and evenings and still carry my studies successfully. But in the middle of the day, I would grow groggy. In the classroom, I would feel that the teacher and the pupils were receding from me, and I would know that I was drifting off to sleep. I would go to the water fountain in the corridor and let cold water run over my wrists, chilling my blood, hoping in that way to keep awake. But the job had its boon. At the midday recess, I would crowd gladly into the corner and eat sandwiches with the boys, slamming down my own money on the counter for what I wanted, swapping descriptions of the homes of the white folks in which we worked. I used to divert them with vivid word pictures of the cursing family, their brooding silences, their indifference toward one another. I told them of the food I managed to eat when the woman's back was turned, and they were filled with friendly envy. The boys would now examine some new article of clothing I had bought. None of us allowed a week to pass without buying something new, paying 50 cents down and 50 cents per week. We knew that we were being cheated, but we never had enough cash to buy in any other way. My mother began a rapid recovery. His mother had been she got she had a stroke, so she was like paralyzed. She'd been in the bed. My mother began a rapid recovery. I was happy when she expressed the hope that someday soon we might have a home of our own. Though Granny was angry and disgusted, my mother began to attend a Methodist church in the neighborhood, and I went to Sunday school, not because my mother begged me to, which she did, but to meet and talk to my classmates. In the black Protestant church, I entered a new world. Prim, brown, puritanical girls who taught in the public schools, black college students who tried to congeal their plantation origin, black boys and girls emerging self-consciously from adolescence, wobbly bosom, black and yellow church matrons, black janitors and porters who sang proudly in the choir, subdued red caps and carpenters who served as deacons, meek, blank-eyed, black and yellow washerwomen who shouted and moaned and danced when hymns were sung, jovial, pot-bellied black bishops, skinny old maids who were constantly giving rallies to raise money, snobbery, clannishness, gossip, intrigue, petty class rivalry, and conscious displays of cheap clothing. I liked it and I did not like it, the church. I longed to be among them, yet when with them, I looked at them if I were a million miles away. I had been kept out of their world too long ever to be able to become a real part of it. Nevertheless, I was so starved for association with people that I allowed myself to be seduced by it all, and for a few months I lived the life of an optimist. A revival began at the church, and my classmates at school urged me to attend. More because I liked them than from any interest in religion, I consented. As the services progressed night after night, my mother tried to persuade me to join, to save my soul at last, to become a member of a responsible community church. Despite the fact that I told them I could never feel any religion, the boys of my gang begged me to come to God. "You believe in God, don't you?" they asked. I evaded the question. "But this is a new day," they said, pulling down the corners of their lips. "We don't holler and moan in church no more. Come to church and be a member of the community." "Oh, I don't know," I said. "We don't want to push you," they said delicately, implying that if I wanted to associate with them, I would have to join. On the last night of the revival, the preacher asked all of those who were members of the church to stand. A good majority of those present rose. Next, the preacher called upon the Christians who were not members of any church to stand. More responded. There remained now but a few young men who, belonging to no church and professing no religion, were scattered sheepishly about the pews. Having thus isolated the sinners, the preacher told the deacons to prevail upon those who lived in darkness to discuss the state of their souls with him. The deacons sped to their task and asked us to go into a room and talk with a man chosen and anointed by God. They held our arms and smiled as they bent and talked to us. Surrounded by people I knew and liked, with my mother's eyes looking pleadingly into mine, it was hard to refuse. I followed the others into a room where the preacher stood. He smiled and shook our hands. "Now, you young men," he began in a brisk, clipped tone, "I want all of you to know God. I'm not asking you to join the church, but it's my duty as a man of God to tell you that you are in danger. Your peril is great. You stand in the need of prayer. Your peril is great. Oh, you stand in need of prayer. Now, I'm going to ask each of you a personal favor. I want you to let the members of this church send up a prayer to God for you. Now, is there any soul here so cold, so hard, so lost that they would say no to that? Can you refuse to let good people of this community pray for you?" He paused dramatically, and no one answered. All the techniques of his appeal were familiar to me, and I sat there feeling foolish, wanting to leap through the window and go home and forget about it. But I sat still, filled with more disgust than sin. "Would any man in this room dare fling no into God's face?" the preacher asked. There was silence. "Now, I'm going to ask all of you to rise and go into the church and take a seat on the front bench," he said, edging on to more definite commitments. "Just stand up," he said. lifting his hands up, palms up, as though he had the power to make us rise by magic. "That's it, young man," he encouraged the first boy, who rose. I followed them, and we sat like wet ducks on the bench facing the congregation. Some part of me was cussing. A low, soft hymn began. "This may be the last time, I don't know." They sang it, hummed it, crooned it, moaned it, implying in sweet, frightening tones that if we did not join the church, then we might die in our sleep that very night and go straight to hell. The church members felt the challenge, and the volume of songs swelled. Could they sing so terrifyingly sweet as to make us join, burst into tears, and drop to our knees? A few boys rose and gave their hands to the preacher. A few women shouted and danced with joy. Another hymn began. "It ain't my brother, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer." During the singing, the preacher tried yet another ruse. He intoned mournfully, letting his voice melt into the singing, yet casting his words above it. "How many mothers of these young men are in here tonight?" Among others, my mother rose and stood profoundly. "Now, good sweet mothers, come right down in front of here," said the preacher. Hoping that this was the night of my long-deferred salvation, my mother came forward, limping, weeping, smiling. The mothers ringed their sons around, whispering, pleading. "Now, you good sweet mothers, the symbols of Mother Mary at the tomb, kneel and pray for your sons, your only sons," the preacher chanted. The mothers knelt. My mother grabbed my hands, and I felt hot tears scalding my fingers. I tried to stifle my disgust. We young men had been trapped by the community, the tribe in which we lived and of which we were a part. The tribe, for its own safety, was asking us to be at one with it. Our mothers were kneeling in public and praying for us to give the sign of allegiance. The hymn ended, and the preacher launched into a highly emotional and symbolic sermon, recounting how our mothers had given birth to us, how they had nursed us from infancy, and how they had tended us when we were sick, how they had seen us grow, how they had watched over us, how they had always known what was best for us. He then called for yet another hymn, which was hummed. He chanted above it in a melancholy tone. "Now, I'm asking the first mother who really loves her son to bring him to me for baptism." God damn, I thought. It had happened quicker than I had expected. My mother was looking steadily at me. "Come, son, let your old mother take you to God," she begged. "I brought you into this world. Now let me help save you." She caught my hand, and I held back. "I've been a good mother as I could," she whispered through her tears. "God is hearing every word," the preacher underscored her plea. This business of saving souls had no ethics. Every human relationship was shamelessly exploited. In essence, the tribe was asking us whether we shared its feelings. If we refused to join the church, it was equivalent to saying no, to placing ourselves in the position of moral monsters. One mother led her beaten and frightened son to the preacher amid shouts of amen and hallelujah. "Don't you love your old crippled mother, Richard?" my mother asked. "Don't leave me standing here with my empty hands," she said, afraid that I would humiliate her in public. It was no longer a question of my believing in God. It was no longer a matter of whether I would steal or lie or murder. It was a simple, urgent matter of public pride, a matter of how much I had in common with other people. If I refused, it meant that I did not love my mother, and that no man in that tight little black community had ever been crazy enough to let himself be placed in such a position. My mother pulled my arm, and I walked with her to the preacher and shook his hand, a gesture that made me a candidate for baptism. There was more songs and prayers. It lasted well after midnight. I walked home limp as a rag. I had not felt anything except sullen anger and a crushing sense of shame. Yet I was somehow glad that I had got it over with. No barriers now stood between me and the community. "Mama, I don't feel a thing," I told her truthfully. "Don't you worry, you'll grow into feeling it," she assured me. And when I confessed to the other boys that I felt nothing, they too admitted that they felt nothing. "But the main thing is to be a member of the church," they said. The Sunday of the baptism arrived. I dressed in my best and showed up sweating. The candidates were huddled together to listen to a sermon in which the road of salvation was mapped out from the cradle to the grave. We were then called to the front of the church and lined up. The preacher, draped in white robes, dipped a small branch of a tree in a huge bowl of water and hovered above the head of the first candidate. So it wasn't like dipping underwater? The preacher, draped in a white robe, dipped a small branch of tree in a huge bowl of water and hovered above the head of the first candidate. "I baptize thee in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost," he pronounced sonorously as he shook the wet branch. Drops trickled down the boy's face. From one boy to another he went, dipping the branch each time. Finally my turn came, and I felt foolish. tense. I wanted to yell for him to stop. I wanted to tell him all this was so much nonsense. Oh, christening, okay. I ain't been christened, baptized. I'm a sinner. Just out here. Finally, my turn came and I felt foolish, tense. I wanted to yell for him to stop. I wanted to tell him that all this was so much nonsense, but I said nothing. The dripping branch was shaking above my head and drops of water wet my face and scalp, some of it rolling down my neck and wetting my back like insects crawling. I wanted to squirm, but I had still. Then it was over. I relaxed. The preacher was now shaking the branch over another boy's head. I sighed. I had been baptized. Even after receiving the right hand of fellowship, Sunday school bored me. The Bible story seemed slow and meaningless when compared to the bloody thunder of pulp narrative. And I was not alone in feeling this. The other boys went to sleep in Sunday school. Finally, the boldest of us confessed that the entire thing was a fraud and we'd play hooky from the church. As summer neared, my mother suffered yet another stroke of paralysis, and again I had to watch her suffer, listen to her groans, powerless to help. That's so sad. I used to lie awake nights and think back to the early days in Arkansas, tracing my mother's life, reliving events, wondering why she had apparently been singled out for so much suffering, meaningless suffering, and I would feel more awe than I ever felt in church. My mind could find no answer, and I would feel rebellious against all life, but I never felt humble. Another charge took place at home. We needed money badly, and Granny and Aunt Addie decided that we could no longer share the entire house, and Uncle Tom and his family were invited to live upstairs at a nominal rental. The dining room and the living room were converted into bedrooms, and for the first time we were squeezed for living space. We began to get on each other's nerves. Uncle Tom had taught school in country towns for 30 years, and as soon as he was under the roof, he proceeded to tell me what was wrong with my life. I ignored him, and he resented it. Rattling pots and pans in the kitchen would now awake me in the mornings, and I would know that Uncle Tom and his family were getting breakfast. One morning I was roused by my uncle's voice calling gently but persistently. I opened my eyes and saw the dim blob of his face peering from behind the jamb of the kitchen door. "What time have you?" I thought he asked me, but I was not sure. "Huh?" I mumbled sleepily. "What time have you got?" he repeated. I lifted myself on my elbow and looked at my dollar watch, which lay on the chair at the bedside. 18 past 5, I mumbled. 18 past 5? He asked. "Yes, sir." "Now, is that the right time?" he asked again. I was tired, sleepy. I did not want to look at the watch again, but I was satisfied that, on the whole, I had given him the correct time. "It's right," I said, snuggling back down into my pillow. "If it's a little slow or a little fast, it's not far wrong." There was a short silence. I thought he had gone. "What on earth do you mean, boy?" he asked in loud anger. I sat up, blinking, staring into the shadows of the room, trying to see the expression on his face. "What do I mean?" I asked, bewildered. "I mean what I said." Had I given him the wrong time? I looked again at my watch. "It's 20 past now." "Why, you impudent black rascal," he thundered. I pushed back the covers of the bed, sensing trouble. "What are you angry about?" I asked. "I never heard a sassier black imp than you in all my life," he spluttered. I swung my feet to the floor so that I could watch him. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You asked me the time, and I told you." "If it's a little fast or slow, it's not far wrong," he said, imitating me in an angry, sarcastic voice. "I've taught school for 30 years, and by God, I've never had a boy say anything like that to me." "But what's wrong with what I said?" I asked the maid. "Shut up," he shouted, "or I'll take my fist and ram it down your sassy throat. One more word out of you, and I'll get a limb and teach you a lesson." "What's the matter with you, Uncle Tom?" I asked. "What's wrong with what I said?" I could hear his breath whistling in his throat. I knew that he was furious. "This day I'm going to give you the whipping some man ought to have given you long ago," he vowed. I got to my feet and grabbed my clothes. The whole thing seemed unreal. I had been confronted so suddenly with struggle that I could not pull all the strings of the situation together at once. I did not feel that I had given him any cause to say I was sassy. I had spoken to him just as I spoke to everybody. Others did not resent my words, so why should he? I heard him go out to the kitchen door, and I knew that he had gone into the backyard. I pulled on my clothes and ran to the window. I saw him tearing a long, young green switch from the elm tree. My body tightened. I was damned if he was going to beat me with it. Until a few days ago, he had never lived near me, had never had any say in my rearing or lack of rearing. I was working, eating my meals out, buying my own clothes, giving what few pennies I could to Granny to help out in the house, and now a strange uncle who felt that I was impolite was going to teach me to act as I had seen the backward black boys act on the plantations, was going to teach me to grin, hang my head, and mumble apologetically when I was spoken to. My senses reeled in protest. No, that could not be. He would not beat me. He was only bluffing. His anger would pass. He would think it over and realize that it was not worth all the bother. Dressed, I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I heard his footsteps come onto the back porch. I felt weak all over. How long was this going to last? How long was I going to be beaten for trifles and less than trifles? I was already so conditioned toward my relatives that when I passed them, I actually had a nervous tick in my muscles, and now I was going to be beaten by someone who did not like the tone of my voice in which I spoke. I ran across the room and pulled out the dresser drawer and got my pack of razor blades. I opened it and took a thin blade of blue steel in each hand. I stood ready for him. The door opened. I was hoping desperately that this was not true, that this dream would end. "Richard," he called me in a cold, even tone. "Yes, sir," I answered, striving to keep my tension out of my voice. "Come here." I walked into the kitchen, my eyes upon him, my hands holding the razors behind my back. "Now, Uncle Tom, what do you want with me?" I asked him. "You need a lesson in how to live with people," he said. "You'll swap. If I do need one, you're not going to give it to me," I said. "You'll swallow those words before I'm through with you," he vowed. "Now listen, Uncle Tom," I said. "You're not going to whip me. You're a stranger to me. You don't support me. I don't live with you." "You shut that foul mouth of yours and get into the backyard," he snapped. He had not seen the razors in my hand. I ducked out the kitchen door and jumped lightly off the porch to the ground. He ran down the steps and advanced with the lifted switch. "I've got a razor in each hand," I warned in a low, charged voice. "If you touch me, I'll cut you. Maybe I'll get cut too, but I'll cut you, so help me God." He paused, staring at my lifted hands in the dawning light of morning. I held a sharp blue edge of steel tightly between thumb and forefinger of each fist. "My God," he gasped. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings this morning," I told him. "You insist I did. Now I'll be damned if I'm going to be beaten because of your hurt feelings." "You're the worst criminal I ever saw," he exclaimed softly. "If you want to fight, I'll fight. That's the way it'll be between us," I told him. "You'll never amount to anything," he said, shaking his head and blinking his eyes in astonishment. "I'm not worried about that," I said. "All I want you to do is keep away from me, now and always." "You'll end on the gallows," he predicted. "If I do, you'll have nothing to do with it," I said. He stared at me in silence. Evidently, he did not believe me, for he took a step forward to test me. "Put those razors down," he commanded. "I'll cut you. I'll cut you," I said, hysteria leaping into my voice, my hands slicing out with points of steel as I backed away. He stopped. He had never in his life faced a person more grimly determined. Now and then he blinked his eyes and shook his head. "You fool," he bellowed suddenly. "I'll make you bloody if you hit me," I warned him. His chest heaved and his body seemed to droop. "Somebody will yet break your spirit," he said. "It won't be you." "You'll get yours someday. You won't be the one to give it to me. And you've just been baptized," he said heavily. "To hell with that," I said. We stood in the early morning light, and a touch of sun broke on the horizon. Roosters were crowing. A bird chirped nearby somewhere. Perhaps the neighbors were listening. Finally, Uncle Tom's face began to twitch. Tears rolled down his cheeks. His lips trembled. "Boy, I'm sorry for you," he said at last. "You better be sorry for yourself," I said. "You think you're a man," he said, dropping his arm and letting the switch drag in the dust of the yard. His lips moved as he groped for words. "But you'll learn, and you'll learn the hard way. I wish I could be an example to you." I knew that I had conquered him, had rid myself of him mentally and emotionally, but I wanted to be sure. "You are not an example to me. You can never be," I spat at him. "You're a warning. Your life isn't so hot that you can tell me what to do." He repaired chairs for a living now, since he was retired from teaching. "Do you think I want to grow up and weave the bottom of chairs for people to sit in?" He twitched violently, trying to control himself. "You'll be sorry you said that," he mumbled. He turned his tall, lean, bent body and walked slowly up the steps. I sat on the porch a long time, waiting for my emotions to ebb. Then I crept cautiously into the house, got my hat, coat, books, and went to work. Went to face the whims of the white folks. I love that chapter. That might be one of my favorite chapters in the book, because that back and forth with his uncle is just such a representation of things that happen in the black family, period. So it's like, you got to fight with your family, your blood, and you got to fight with the white man at work. And how he stood up for himself. He was big on his self-respect. He wasn't letting white people, his uncles, he was going to cut his aunt earlier in the book. And then it also, that dynamic of when he first came in, when Uncle first came in and he asked him the time, and first of all, the boy's sleepy, he's just waking up, he's not all the way tuned in, but then he said, you, like, you know, whether it's fast or slow, it ain't too far off, and the uncle gets offended. And then the boy is asking, well, what did I do to offend you? Instead of communicating and saying, well, I felt that too fast, too slow, like, that was smart, like you was being smart, like, just communicating, because perception is everything, and if you take something the wrong way, you can fall out with people over how you thought they meant it. Now, tone is everything, and this little boy do sound like he had a smart mouth, but it sounded like he just had a brain, and he thought for himself, and he took up for himself. And some people were just so sensitive and offended by everything he had to say. And his family, his grandmother, his aunt, like the aunt early in the book beat him in the classroom because she accused him of dropping walnuts on the floor. And he's telling her, I didn't. And she just is not letting it go. And she takes it home and wants to beat him. And he's like, I'm not about to keep getting beat because y'all just want to beat, because y'all can't communicate. So I don't have children. I do understand that there's a fine line in what discipline looks like for different people, but I've seen that in my family, and other people have seen it in theirs. Just beating your child instead of communicating with them. There's a viral video going on now of a father beating his 12-year-old daughter for having sex, and I don't have too much of an opinion on it, but the recording of it and the virility of it, making it even online and viral, it just makes you wonder, like, what conversations were had or could be had, instead of just beating. Like, we just get so, and that's why we need to, I'll be posting, did you wake up, stress, drink water, meditate, you know, tune in before you start your day, before you start talking to people, before you start dealing with stuff. Because if we're just reacting in anger with violence so easily, what does that really say about us? How can we let what somebody else do outside of us affect us to that extent? I can only imagine what parents go through, because that is an extension of yourself, and you want them to be safe and follow guidelines and da-da-da-da-da. But just in general, whether it's your child or it's your cousin or your child's father, like, we have to be more proactive in tuning in and managing our emotions. And we can do that by drinking water, getting more plants into our diet, getting exercise, meditating, things that are stimulating your brain and oxygen and blood flow. That's why these things are necessary, and they're so easy to do, they're so easy not to do. Just stretching in the morning, getting into yoga. I like to do it with the sun. Just be out here stretching in my yard, or you could do it in the house if you don't worry about being seen. But yeah, this is a really great book. I love this book. So that was chapter 6. I'm gonna upload this onto my YouTube channel, so check me out. And I'm having a yard sale. I'm about to crochet and just vibe out. So hope y'all have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. Peace, love, and light.